Thank you all for taking the time to come out for a really exciting installation of our monthly Bergen County Revolutionary War Roundtable. Before we introduce and get into the meat and potatoes of this evening, I want to take a moment to thank the County Executive, James J. Tedesco III, and the Board of County Commissioners, of which we are lucky to have one with us tonight, one of our favorites here, Commissioner Mary Amoroso. They're a big support that we get to be able to do programming like this and put it on for the residents and our visitors. I'd also be remiss if I didn't put on my little PBS announcer hat for a quick second and say that this programming is funded in part by viewers like you. No, but seriously, in part by an operating support grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission, a division of the Department of State. How'd I do? Yeah, let's go. There we go. Mary, a couple words?
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Now, we all know that Benedict Arnold, we did a Benedict Arnold earlier on, and his name is so linked with treachery. It's the beginning and end of treachery, although he was a war hero before that. And now we're going to hear from the brains of that operation, his wife. And she's standing there, in very sweet looking. But it's going to be exciting to hear her point of view on this. So I'm glad you're all here. Please keep coming. We're happy to sponsor these things. We're learning so much. So thank you. Take care.
Char Weigel is a board member of the Odell Rochambeau Headquarters Museum, the Vice President of Special Projects for Revolutionary Westchester 250, and a researcher and author on Westchester's Revolutionary War history. Tonight, she will bring to life a woman who has been often portrayed in fiction, occasionally in history, but whose own voice has rarely been heard amidst so many assumptions. You will hear the story of Miss Margaret Arnold, based entirely on primary sources, including letters, family records, wills, and other documents. There will be time for at least a few questions after, so please be sure to have them ready. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Miss Peggy Shippen.
I am just thrilled to be with you, although I would like to say to Mr. Cullen that the invitation I received to come here tonight was in the name of Miss Peggy Shippen. And that was my name when I was a youth, but for many decades now, I have been married and used my married name. But I'm going to take that as a sign that you are interested in hearing something about when I was a youth and some choices that I made then that have shaped the woman I am now. Margaret Arnold, Mrs. Margaret Arnold, wife of Benedict Arnold. But first, a little context might be helpful. I was born and raised in Philadelphia. I am in the 5th generation of Shippens to have lived in that city. My great-great-grandfather and grandfather were mayors of the city. Papa still lives there. He is a very successful lawyer, and we are very close. And I, in particular, wanted to tell you, the people of Bergen County, what he did during the rebellion, because I think you will truly understand. He remained neutral. I say you will understand because it was so hard for you. You were not able to be neutral. I know you were pressed by the military from both sides, neighbors from both sides, friends, family, forcing you to choose a side. And when you did, you and your farm and your family were often prey to the other side. And I know this because I met many political refugees from this county when I lived in New York City. So I did learn a lot about your lives at the time. But when I think of the rebellion, my first thought goes to the fall of 1777. The British occupied Philadelphia. I was 17. So young. And as a 17-year-old, all I could think of was fun, friends, and fashion. Have you known a 17-year-old like I was? I wager you have. It seemed that overnight the city filled up with handsome young men in their smart red coats. Every evening there was a ball, a trip to the theater, a dinner out. What was it Dr. Franklin said about those times? He said, "It is not that the British took Philadelphia, It's that Philadelphia took the British. And that is so true. I was part of a group of girls. All of them were daughters of wealthy Loyalist families. My sister Betsy and I, the only ones from a neutral family. And you would find us many afternoons during the week going in and out of the shops on Market Street, and we were marveling at the gowns and the silks and the fashion plates that were just off the boats from London, because the British supply ships could sail straight up the Delaware, dock off of Front Street, and ensure that the city was constantly supplied with necessities and luxuries. I brought a sketch of myself from that time to show you. I will pass it around. This was done, I'll move it around and then pass it. This was done by one of my favorites of those young British officers at the time, Captain John Andre. And when John did that sketch, Dr. Franklin had already left for Paris. But before he left, and he would see me, our families were close, we would see each other out in the evening, and every time he saw me, he said the same thing. "Peggy, you look positively electrified." It never got old. He was, of course, right, but I did survive my nightly electrocutions, and then things changed. In June of '78, the British withdrew to concentrate their forces in New York City, and the Americans became our occupiers. George Washington appointed the wounded war hero of the battles of Saratoga, Major General Benedict Arnold, to be commandant of Philadelphia. And the first thing the general did, close down all those shops and impose martial law. And later, I learned how necessary that was, because those British supply ships that I told you about, they were not going to come to a city under American occupation. So the shelves were empty, the prices were extraordinarily high. There was unrest, even stonings in the street. So the general came to consult with Papa. He came back the next day and the next. And I said to Betsy, "This man has so many questions." And she laughed and said, "You chucklehead, he's coming to see you." Oh, I did not know my mind. I was 17, he was 38. Papa was very concerned that the numerous injuries to his leg in the battles for your country would mean that he could not support a family. So I put up my defenses. But, oh my, did he lay siege. And eventually, Papa consented, and I relented, and we were wed in April of 1779. And within a few weeks, the general invited a local merchant, Joseph Stansbury, to our quarters. And Stansbury was known in certain circles for having connections to the British in New York City. And in fact, he opened a line of communication through which letters began to flow. These letters were in code, under false names, often interlined with invisible ink. And who was receiving the letters on the British end? My old friend, John Andre, now the Chief Intelligence Officer for British Commanding General Sir Henry Clinton. And what were these letters about? Well, the general and I had come to believe that it would be impossible for the rebels to win the war. The general told me about the severe shortages of munitions, cannonballs. You may have experienced coming home to your farm here and finding every window in the house dismantled. And what that would mean is an American foraging party had come through. They did not want your window panes. They wanted the lead, holding them in place and serving as window weights. Why? Because they were desperately short of musket balls, and they needed to melt it down. In Philadelphia, I saw the young soldiers trying to buy supplies with the money issued to them by the Continental Congress. By 1780, that money was not backed by gold or silver. And when a merchant saw that it was the intended form of payment, the price skyrocketed. My cousin, Nettie Bird, was fighting with the Americans. And he wrote Betsy and I, and he said that there were days when his unit did not have any food. And I still think of this. Some of the men, some mere boys, drummer boys of 10 or 12 years old, did not have shoes. So I ask you, what kind of government would ask soldiers to pick up a musket and march into battle barefoot? So in August 3rd of 1780, just north of here in Peekskill, General Washington signed the papers that appointed the general to be commandant of West Point and the Hudson Highlands. If the general could turn West Point over to the British, give the British control of the Hudson River, ideally with minimum bloodshed, the British could use the river like a cleaver to split apart the rebelling colonies, isolate New England, and force a surrender. The general sent a member of his family, Major David Franks, to Philadelphia to bring me to West Point. The general left such specific instructions for our journey. I was told I had to leave the coach at every river crossing and walk across, lest there be an accident that the coach would fall in the river. And he identified every stop we were to make along the way. And one of them was not far from here, in Hohokus. Mrs. Theodosia Prevost at the Hermitage hosted us for a night on the way up. Her husband was a British officer, but Mrs. Prevost was very friendly to the American officers, and her home often served as a base, including for General Washington and others. So I arrived at West Point on September 15th, 1780, and I had with me our firstborn son, Edward Shippen Arnold, named for my papa, not even 6 months old. Everything was in place and ready to go. And then everything fell apart. My friend John was captured and would soon be executed. The general escaped to the safety of British-occupied New York City, and I became frantic. I had something that sometimes people referred to as a female disorder or a nervous malady. In times of stress, it would feel as if the tightest corset in the world was on me. And I would breathe and breathe and breathe, but the breath would not reach my lungs. I would feel this wave of panic take over me. It had happened earlier that summer when I was dining with Robert Morris and his wife in Philadelphia. And I received some bad news about the general. And at that dinner, I fainted. This time I did not faint, but I have no memory of what I did. I learned afterwards from my maid and the general's 2 aides that I began screaming, trying to pull my clothes off because I could not breathe. What was I screaming? I was screaming that the general had left me, that he was gone, he was never to return. I had no friends in this country, and that George Washington would come and kill me and my baby. The general's aides were so alarmed, they summoned Dr. Eustace, William Eustace, who was on the grounds of the Robinson House where we were staying, and he was caring for the wounded American soldiers there. And when Mr. Eustace, Dr. Eustace came in, he said, "You must get her husband right away, or I think she will die of convulsions." But everyone assumed, because my husband had told them, that he had gone to West Point to ready it for the arrival of His Excellency George Washington. Yet I was telling the truth. He had gone. He had left me. And later, the fact that I was telling the truth became apparent. Once my senses returned and His Excellency George Washington was there, he honored the request sent to him by the general to give me a choice. I could have safe passage to join the general in British-occupied New York City, or to return to my family in Philadelphia. This was, perhaps, the most important choice of my life that I would make with no counsel other than my own, my choice. What did I choose? I chose to return to Philadelphia. And Major David Franks was assigned to protect me and escort me there. We again stayed at the Hermitage with Mrs. Prevost. I took great comfort in the fact that she had found a way to live a life that now I was living, married to a British officer but among the Americans. When I finally reached Philadelphia, the city was chaos. They were hanging the general in effigy, and I had to stay in my parents' home for my own safekeeping. And even there, the rumors reached us, whispered words of exile and banishment. My papa took my case all the way to the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania, arguing that I should be allowed to stay as a political refugee. For my part, I offered to turn over any correspondence from the general and to not write him back, but to no avail. So November found me back in the coach, heading across New Jersey. And as I approached the shores of this great river that has so many names, Hudson's River, the river north, to me, the river Styx. It took all my courage to take tiny Edward into my arms and step onto the vessel that was to ferry me across to my new life as the wife of British Brigadier General Benedict Arnold. The melancholy that has plagued me my whole life descended like a curtain that I could not lift. A woman highly placed in New York society paid call to me and said to everyone afterwards that she had expected to meet the belle of Philadelphia, and all she found was an empty shell of a woman. It was so unkind, but not untrue. And it was tiny Edward who, every time I caught his eye, his face just broke into this wreath of smiles that helped me regain my spirits. And once I did, I realized the city I was in, New York City, was filled with souls just like me. Maybe we had grievances, but we did not think war was the answer. And many were refugees from Westchester, from Bergen County, who were living there. I marveled at the might of the British Crown, that they could support this incredible war effort and thousands of refugees at the same time. And then something wonderful happened. I found I was expecting with our second child. And thank the Lord, I was safely delivered in August with James Robertson Arnold. But after that, some very bad news. Lord Cornwallis's defeat at Yorktown. And once that news was heard, the general was not safe even within the British lines. So we had to move to London. I did not want to leave this country. This was my country. It was the only country I knew. The Shippens in England were 5 generations removed from me. But I had no choice. But I will tell you, I was pleasantly surprised when we arrived, because King George III and Queen Charlotte were so kind to me. The Queen let it be known that she favored me, and the King vested a pension in me and my children for very meritorious service. The general was having a tougher time. He very much wanted an appointment, a commission in the British Army or Navy. And the debate went all the way to Parliament, but the decision was it would set a bad example to have him in the military for all the young soldiers. So he had to pursue endeavors of a mercantile nature to support our growing family. He had many letters of marques for privateers, plans always so grand, but rarely did the outcome exceed the expenses. So the decision was made that we would move to Canada. There were many, many refugees in Canada. There was a good opportunity for a merchant, and there was family. We had family in Canada. So we went to St. John's, New Brunswick. And when I was there, I realized I was close enough to pay a visit to Philadelphia. So in November of 1789, with my maid and my then youngest son, George, named for the 2 Georges in our life, I boarded a ship and I came to Philadelphia. And that visit was nothing like the busy time of my teenage years. I spent it quietly visiting with my sisters and cousins and their families. And most afternoons you would find me curled up in my favorite chair in Papa's study. He was working quietly at his desk, and I was reading my way through his classics like I did as a child. And soon it was April, and time for me to return to my family in New Brunswick. And not too long after that, we moved back to London, where we live today. My days are filled taking care of my 4 wonderful sons, and my sweet, sweet little daughter, Sophia. The general is not doing so well. I have had to assume a very unusual role of taking over the family finances. I have sold the coach. I've sold all the wine. I've sold our plate, much of our furniture. I'm actually renting some pieces back from my housekeeper, and Curlo and I joke all the time that she lives in a grander style than her mistress. And I noticed you ladies when I came in looking at my gown. And I am very well aware that in London in 1801, this is not the fashion. And yet, I have lost all desire to pursue the whims of the gods of fashions. All I care about right now is that my children will have a clean slate to start their lives and inherit none of the debt or the burden of the rectitude of their parents' choices. So I want to thank you for listening to my story. Yes, the story of the young Peggy Shippen, but also the woman that I have become. And I would be happy to answer any questions you may have now to the best of my ability. Yes. Oh, sorry. Wait, hold on. Okay, or I can repeat the question, but the mic's even better. Everyone will hear it then. Yeah.
When you were going back to Philly, was it as a neutral or a patriot?
When I was going back to Philly, it's a very good question because I was banished. But I was only banished for the length of the conflict. I was returning as a British citizen to visit my family in Philly. And there was that type of movement back and forth that was happening at that time. So, yes, sir.
What were your personal feelings about Arnold's campaign through Virginia in 1780, including the burning of entire towns?
So what were my feelings about the 1780 campaign? To be honest with you, it was difficult for me in New York City to have a lot of information about what was happening at the time. It is hard for people that I meet today to understand how news traveled. Often when we would write a letter, I would write a letter, and then in my next letter, if I hadn't heard, I would repeat everything I had said because I would worry that my letter had not gotten through. So the news came slowly to us in terms of what was happening with the general. And most of the news I got from the general himself when he returned to New York City. My feelings were that he was a British officer and needed to win, to do what he could to win. I think there was a question here.
What happened with your children?
With my children, thank you for asking about my children, because I think of everything, if I could define myself, it is first as a mother. So and I was a stepmother. The general, his first wife was Margaret. She passed, so he was a widower. He had 3 young children that his sister Hannah, who never married, cared for while the general was going to Quebec, was at Saratoga. So Hannah was very important to the general. Those children were Benedict, Richard, and Henry, but we called him Harry. Benedict actually died as a soldier in the West Indies. He had an injury to his leg. He refused to allow them to amputate the leg, if that sounds familiar, but the leg became infected and he died. Richard and Henry moved to Canada. So when we were in Canada, they were with us. They went into business with my husband, the general, and they stayed in Canada. And eventually there was land awarded to our family in Canada that they became the proprietors of. My children, the eldest was Edward. Actually, all my boys went into the military. Edward became an officer in India. My second born, James Robertson, named for General James Robertson, who was so kind to us when the general first came to the British. He was a surveyor, and he was in Gibraltar and then in the West Indies. My third son, George. George and William, third and fourth sons, they were much younger. And at that point, we were struggling financially. And after the general passed, he died in 1801, Lord Cornwallis helped me obtain scholarship. It was an East India Company scholarship for my third son, George, to be able to attend military school. And then my fourth son, William Fitch, also attended that same military school. My daughter Sophia married and had children, but she died rather young, as did my mother as well. So thank you for asking about them. They are the joy of my life.
Major John Andre drew a very lovely picture of you. Was he romantically interested in you?
No one has ever asked me that question. So it was a romantic time, and there was a large group of young ladies who were spending a lot of times with a group of the British military officers, including John Andre. One marriage came out of that as well. Perhaps you've heard of the Meshianza. I'm answering your question, but I will answer it by way of explaining what that was. So when General Howe, who was the commander of the British forces in Philadelphia, he was the commander of the British forces for the Battle of Saratoga. And after a while in Philadelphia, General Howe was given an opportunity to spend more time with his family and was being recalled to England. And this is when General Clinton took over. And so for General Howe's departure, Captain Andre and many of his friends decided to have an immense ball, the Meshianza, and it was going to be styled on Egyptian and Middle Eastern clothing and themes, and also medieval knights. And I was not John Andre's date for that ball. That was Peggy Chu, another Peggy. So I offer that by way of evidence that we were friendly, we were very friendly, but we were just friends. And at that time, friendships often looked to be romantic because of the way letters were written, the language was used. Not uncommon to have locks of hair given to you by your friends, but there's no evidence that there was anything more than a friendship.
This is where I get my steps in.
So Major John, I believe, was hung in Old Tappan. And how did he get caught?
Yeah. I'm going to step out of the role as Peggy, okay? Because this subject of his capture is one that I have done quite a bit of research on. And we can send you, it's the story in the Westchester County Historian. I spent really decades researching this, but a couple of years looking at the last 7 days before Arnold's defection and what the Vulture was doing in Haverstraw Bay. So how did he get caught? First of all, it need not have been Andre coming up to meet with Arnold. Andre wanted to meet with Arnold because the military for both sides at that point was a strong form of advancement. Andre did not come from peerage. He did come from a family of means, but his hope was if he could have pulled off this getting West Point and winning the war, he could see a generalship, right, in his future. So he insisted on being the one. Beverly Robinson was on the Vulture as well and could easily, and in fact, Andre came up late to the Vulture. He wasn't there when it sailed up on September 17th. Robinson was on there, and Arnold and Robinson were trying to use different ruses to meet, but it didn't work out. Andre came up on the Ranger, a sloop, and then word was gotten that there would be someone coming to the Vulture. That someone happened to be Joshua Hetz Smith, lived in Haverstraw, a civilian, an accomplice of Arnold. Smith was court-martialed, interesting for a civilian, but the laws at that time allowed a court-martial. And he was acquitted because there was not sufficient evidence that he knew what was going on. But I'll tell you something later that proves he did. By finishing this story, so Smith is rowed out to the boat. It's around 1 a.m. on the morning of September 22nd. And two of Smith's tenant farmers, the Cahoon brothers, are rowing the boat. And the boat gets to the Vulture, and Smith goes up on a rope ladder, and he meets a man, John Anderson. John Anderson was the name that John Andre was using in all of the correspondence. John Anderson has a blue surcoat over his red regimentals, which you can't see. So Anderson climbs down into the boat, and the Cahoons row Joshua Hatt Smith, John Anderson, and themselves to the shore at Haverstraw. You can pretty much still see where it was. You can walk down the path there. Arnold has come. He's waiting in a grove of fir trees. John Anderson and Arnold talk for quite a while. Arnold definitely would have given him the papers there. And what is the objective? Finalizing the amount of money Arnold's going to be paid, and giving as much instructions as he can to the British to guide their attack on West Point, because if it's successful, it's more lucrative for him. Oh, and by the way, George Washington is on his way at that very moment to the Robinson House. So Arnold is also letting the British know you can capture or kill Washington, whatever you want to do. So John Anderson has all of this information, and he wants to be rowed back to the Vulture to head down to New York City. Admiral George Rodney is there with a portion of the British Navy for a very limited amount of time. Everything has to happen right away. And by the way, Arnold has been weakening Westfort, and he can't keep, he's getting a lot of questions. How many men do we need to send out to cut wood? So he can't keep weakening the fort. It all has to happen. And the Cahoons refuse to row him back. They're tired. They would be rowing against the tide. They're civilians. Arnold first promises them immense amounts of rum, and then he threatens them, and they don't care. They are just too tired, and they're not going to do it. So the entire group retreat to the house in Haverstraw. Now we're behind American lines here, where Joshua Hatt Smith is staying in his brother's house in Haverstraw. And the intent is to let the Cahoons rest up and then row Andre Anderson back. But at dawn that morning, so that all happens at 1 a.m. at dawn, there's a cannonade that is started from across the river at what is today Croton Point Park. At the time it was called Teller's Point. And American Colonel James Livingston had been working for the better part of a week against sabotage by Arnold of his efforts, but he didn't know Arnold was sabotaging him, to get some cannons and ammunition to fire his little 4-pound cannon. Do I have any military people in the audience here? A 4-pound cannon, not a big cannon. And he's fired it at the Vulture. She's anchored in Haverstraw Bay, waiting for people to come back, and she's taking shots. So she has to weigh anchor, and she drops downriver to Sing Sing, today Ossining. And now the Cahoons, stubborn Dutchmen and no idiots, they're not going to row back when there's cannonballs flying. So Arnold has to convince Andre to go overland through Westchester County because everything has to happen right away. So he sets off at dusk on the 22nd of September, and he crosses at Stony Point to Verplank's Point. That's called King's Ferry. And he hopes to proceed all the way to New York City. And the plan is, if he meets British, he'll tell them who he is. If he meets Americans, Arnold has given him a pass. And it says, allow Mr. John Anderson through to the White Plains and below if he chooses, he being on business for me, Benedict Arnold. So either way, there's a plan. He stopped there, the little party. Joshua Hatt Smith is guiding him, and a man Smith enslaves, whose name I don't know yet. They have to stop. They're forced to stop in Crompton near Pines Bridge today. And the next morning, before dawn, on September 23rd, Smith points him and says, just keep heading south. You're going to be fine. You're going to get to White Plains. And Smith goes back to have dinner with Arnold. So Andre has now had 2 sleepless nights. The first night waiting at Smith's house, the second night where he's forced to wait in order to proceed the next morning. Smith says he never took his boots off. Isn't that interesting? And so he's riding south, and there are different stories now about why he ends up taking a turn to the west to go to Terrytown. A few different stories about why he does, but he does. So he now is in Terrytown on the Albany Post Road, and there are 3 militiamen who have been stationed there looking for cow thieves, for Loyalists. The Loyalist militia was vicious, the fights between the American and Loyalist militia in Westchester. And they see a man they don't recognize, and they stop him. And Andre, who, by the way, he's a top spy master, he's not a top spy. Like, he's not in the field, right? But he wanted to do this. And so Andre makes a fatal mistake. And he sees that one of the men, John Paulding, is wearing a green Hessian coat. And the Hessians are the military auxiliaries of the British. Paulding actually obtained the coat because that was the second of 3 times that he was taken prisoner, and he was being held in prison in New York City, and he escaped. And part of his escape was obtaining this Hessian coat so he could move through the city. And Andre sees this, and he speaks first, and he says, gentlemen, I hope we're of the same party. And Paulding says, I'm saying this, somebody here, one of my friends, knows this story really well too, and has written a wonderful book about this for children, Rob Skeet there. He says, I hope we're of the same party. And Paulding says, well, what party would that be? And Andre says, the party of the lower part, meaning British-occupied New York City. And Paulding nods or says yes. And Andre says, oh, thank God, because I'm a British officer on urgent business, you need to let me through. And then Paulding says, we're Americans. And Andre says, what's a guy got to do to get by these days? He literally says just about that. And he pulls out the pass from Benedict Arnold. And now these guys are suspicious. John Paulding is literate. David Williams might have been literate. And so they decide his story is just too conflicting. They search him, and in his boots, they find the papers. And the papers are West Point, West Point, West Point. So they take him to a local military commander, and then there's a whole Where's Waldo search through Westchester. He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. Eventually, he is going to reveal that he is actually Major John Andre, Adjutant General to British Commanding General Sir Henry Clinton. He writes a letter to Washington. He says, and you should trade me, because in Charleston, we got thousands of your men. For someone like me, you can get a lot of them back. But Washington doesn't care to be told what to do by a captured British officer. And then he's tried in a military tribunal at Japan, found to be guilty of being a spy. He was behind enemy lines, under a false name, in civilian clothes. And he is hanged in Japan. So there's so many moments in that story. Like, what if the Cahoons had rowed him back? What if Livingston hadn't fired on the Vulture? What if he had been allowed to go that night as he intended? He was stopped by an American sentry who said, there's too many British marauding, it won't be safe. Well, Andre would have wanted to continue, but he had to. At that point, he was with Joshua Head Smith. He was purporting to be an American, so he had to wait. What if he had been able to go through? There's so many moments that things could have been different in that story that it's just eternally fascinating. So, yes, sir.
Right. Oh, let me come over to you.
I'm listening.
Would you say you were always a loyalist, or did your allegiance change to the American patriots?
Yes.
Or the loyalists, or back and forth?
So again, I have to speak as a historian here. I don't know. I really don't know. So the Shippens, writ large, were American. So let's see, Peggy's great uncle, Dr. William Shippen, founded the Junto in Philadelphia with Ben Franklin. Peggy's uncle, Dr. William Shippen, was commander of hospitals for George Washington. Peggy's cousin, Nettie Bird, is fighting with the Americans. Peggy's grandfather, Edward Shippen, is a staunch American before he dies. So there's a lot of American influence there in that family. Peggy's dad, remaining neutral, was probably an act of kind of economic choice, and he was able to pull it off. And then, of course, he becomes the Chief Justice of the state of Pennsylvania. So the Shippens are viewed as Americans. So Peggy, I mean, you know what you tell your kids, who are they hanging out with, right? Like, she's hanging out with a big group of Loyalist girls, so that's a piece of it. It was a very heady time when all of those British officers were in Philadelphia. She marries an American general, right? Benedict Arnold. Her father probably thinks it's a good marriage. He's a good catch. The dad does write to his brother and says, I am really worried because this guy's leg is a mess and I don't know if he'll be able to support her. But the conclusion is that he will, and he blesses the marriage. Peggy's cousins write that she put her guard up, and that comment about laying siege, that's in the letters about what he does to try to win her over. So eventually she marries him. The first letters start going about 6 weeks after the marriage. But when does Arnold turn? Like, a lot of people, so this is where, okay, we're all adults here. It's the Madonna or the whore syndrome in the way women are looked at, right? So there are many people, oh, Peggy turned him. She convinced him. I gotta say, I don't know. Benedict Arnold, he had a lot of grievances, you know. He had a lot of opinions of his own. I sincerely doubt that Peggy turned him, but somehow they came together. So by that point in their marriage, she did know what was going on, but she wasn't the main actor. He was the main actor in that. So when does she become a Loyalist and change? I don't know. It's a very, very interesting question. Most of the letters that you'd most like to see that could tell you something were burned by her family because they were letters about that time.
And are your descendants in England, Canada, and Pennsylvania today?
Well, in Bergen County today, right? So we have, right? I mean, can I out you and just yeah, so, yeah, so the Arnolds are in England, in Canada. His son, I think it was Henry, moved to New York City in the early 1800s. So there are descendants all over of the Arnold family, and Peggy, of course, as well. But some of them were from his first wife, Margaret, too. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Upon the discovery of Andre as a spy, the word came to George Washington. Of course, he was immediately upset. And I don't know if it was he or one of his lieutenants came to interview or talk to you at West Point. Was there an occasion such as that?
Talking to Peggy?
Yes.
Yeah, so what happened in that day is so interesting. It's another one of those, but for about a half hour, things could have turned out differently. So Colonel John Jameson is the second in command of Sheldon's Dragoons. They are the 2nd Continental Dragoons. They are stationed in Westchester. They are the Continental Army in Westchester. Mostly the Continental Army isn't in Westchester because it's the bitterly divided neutral ground, but a cavalry, dragoons can move around, move in and out. So, so Andre's sent under the name of John Anderson. He's called back. Eventually he writes this letter, and Jameson sends a copy of the letter from Andre saying, I am Adjutant General, Major John Andre. He sends it, he insists on sending it to Benedict Arnold and one to George Washington. So 2 packets go out at the same time. They both come back initially, but they go out again. And the second time, they're headed for the Robinson house. So where Arnold is staying, and it was typical for the Commandant of Westchester. General Howe before him also stayed there. Is near Garrison, New York today, on the east side of the river. And every day he's being rowed across to West Point. So the letters arrive. George Washington, at that moment, with his small lifeguard entourage, has come from Pawling, New York area to Fishkill and is heading down to meet with Benedict Arnold. Washington tells the group, and this is pretty well documented, you're all in love with Peggy Shippen, why don't you go ahead and have breakfast? I'm going to look at the readouts here. And Lafayette stays behind with Washington, and they're looking at the readouts. So the point is Hamilton, Tench Tillman, McHenry, other of Washington's aides, are at the Robinson house having breakfast with Arnold at the table when these packets arrive. Now, Arnold, his head must have been exploding because the last he knew, John Andre set out from Haverstraw the evening of September 22nd. This is now the morning of September 25th. Is there going to be an invasion? What's going to happen? Did he get through? Like, imagine how he must have been just on pins and needles. So he reads the stuff right away. The copy that's coming to Washington isn't read right away. So Arnold folds it up, he excuses himself, he goes upstairs to see Peggy for about 10 minutes, and he comes down and he says, George Washington, I'm going to West Point. I'm going to be rowed to West Point. I want to get it ready for His Excellency's arrival. So he scoots out, and it's like a half hour later that Washington arrives there. Now, had Washington arrived before he left, he wouldn't have been able to do this. But he's not going to West Point. What he's doing is he was quite a horseman. You can take the Putnam History Museum it's called Arnold's Flight Walking Tour. It's really more like a climbing tour. So I warn you, because you go down the ravine that he went down, and every day he had a barge there where they would row him across to West Point. And he got on the barge, he put his saddle on the barge for a very specific reason, and he told the barge, head south. He doesn't know what he's going to do, but he's trying to get away. And he had been going back, went back and forth a lot. He was going to King's Ferry. It wasn't unusual for him to be on a barge going different places. He was Commandant of the Highlands. So Washington arrives at the Robinson house, and everyone says, well, he went over to West Point. So Washington said, well, I'm going to go to West Point. And he's on another barge getting there, and Colonel John Lamb, head of artillery, says, sir, we did not know you were coming, or we would have had a cannon salute. And he's like, what do you mean? Arnold's here. And Lamb says, sir, he has not been here for days. So Washington still, like nobody still is suspecting anything. But he comes back, and by that point, Hamilton, his correspondence secretary, had read the communication, and Hamilton meets him as he comes back. And what a conversation that must have been, right? So Washington is quoted as having said, Arnold has betrayed us, whom? He was always so correct. Whom can we trust now? But it was such a personal betrayal. Washington had done so much to support Arnold, and Arnold had done so much. There was a cabal against Washington. He was ready to lose his job before Saratoga. And Washington was very grateful to Arnold, and this really devastated him personally. So fast riders go out from the Robinson house to Nathaniel Greene in Tappan, to all of the commands, and all of the orderly books for the morning of September 26 say the same thing. Treason of the blackest dye was just discovered. So they've all been alerted. Everybody's on high alert. And Washington, you know, many of us, probably everyone in this room, I've taught kids now that don't know 9/11, they didn't live through 9/11, but I remember in 9/11 wondering, what next, right? And that must be how Washington didn't know. How far was this conspiracy? Who could he trust? Is there going to be an attack coming? It was a very, very difficult time for him, but he quickly kind of cleared people he could trust. And so that was the story of what happened that day, which is also incredibly extraordinary about all of these near misses.
Did anyone come to interview you?
To interview Peggy. Okay, so Hamilton, yeah. So Arnold's two aides, Major David Franks, and at the time, Colonel Richard Varick. You've all had a wonderful presentation on Richard Varick. Amazing person, right? They were with Peggy the whole time and very worried about her, along with Peggy's maid, when she was having what I think today we would describe as panic attacks, is what her letters describe happening over time. You know, mental health issues were very much of something for Peggy. And so they were talking to her. Hamilton came, Hamilton talked to her, but entire time, even before they knew what had happened with Arnold, she was telling them, he's gone, he's left me, I have no one. George Washington is going to come and kill me. That is what Peggy started to say immediately. And Varick and Franks would say, don't say anything around her, because when she gets one of her fits, she repeats everything she said. So, and that was written down. So Hamilton talked to her. She did have a brief period of time with Washington. Arnold had gotten a letter. When he got on the Vulture, he sent a letter back with the bargeman, and that letter said, my two aides are innocent, Franks and Varick, they're innocent. Joshua Head Smith is innocent, and Peggy is totally innocent. And would you please give her the option of coming to be with me in New York City or her family? So Arnold actually asked, and Washington did give her that option. So Washington also talked to her too.
And there was an observation made that you had basically conned George Washington in accepting your story.
So this is where I'm going to present to you a conflicting picture. The con is something that has been in movies, etc. If she was conning, why would she say, he's gone, he's left me, he's left? Like, she was telling the truth early on. In reading about her mental health history, I'm going to say I don't know. I lean on the side is that she wasn't conning him, because she had these episodes her whole life. There was another time in London, she wrote her dad and she said, you know what, I got this bill delivered to me. I must have been in one of my fits and told them I wanted to pay it, because I don't remember anything about why this bill is here. And she wrote that to her dad. So she had this history of doing that. So it's not clear. It's not clear, but you can't assume it was a con. I would say that.
Okay, thank you.
It's fascinating though, right? Yeah. That's why I wanted to tell you the true story.
We have time for about 2 more questions, so I'll come over here.
What did you do after your husband's passing?
Oh. So, again, I'll speak as a historian because I'll talk about my passing too. So Arnold died in 1801, and they were in debt. And debtor's prison was a thing, right? People were in prison for debt back then. So Peggy very, very much wanted to be sure that when she died, and she was not healthy, that the children did not inherit debt, because that would have been potentially prison for her older children. So she sold all of the family possessions that she could. There was a man she only refers to as the Swede in her letters. So there was a privateering expedition that Arnold had gotten letters of marque for, and the Swede was challenging whether that ship had been taken lawfully. And that went all the way up through the British courts, and she writes her father, if we lose this case, we are ruined because I have no money to pay it. And the final decision was in her favor about 6 months before she died. So she had developed perhaps uterine cancer or ovarian cancer. She talks about cancer of the female system. She says, there are some doctors that say they could operate, but I fear that will put a period on my life, is the way she phrased it. So she did not have any operation. She did get the family out of debt. The other thing that she did, Arnold made her the executor, sole executor of his will. his will, now think about this, if you have a will, think about this. His will said, first I want the children from my first marriage to get this sum of money. Then the rest of it will go for my wife Peggy and the remaining children. Well, there wasn't enough money to even pay the children from the first marriage. So this is why she's also selling off the possessions, but she makes it. She pays them, she writes them and says, I am now paying you. I'm paying you the full amount that your father wanted me to pay you. I have no money, but I have satisfied the terms of his will. And it's in June-ish of 1804 that she passes. And so, but she knows that her children are launched, and that gives her great comfort. Her mom died young, she was 44, and her daughter Sophia dies around age 42. So it's very interesting what goes on in that family. So one more question, right? I think, did someone had a question here? Yeah.
All right, coming over with this so we get it on the video for later.
Tongues will wag, of course, but it's often reported that Arnold's interest in the bounty offered by the British was due to keeping you in the manner to which you were accustomed. Is there any truth to that?
Well, so there is, there is some truth, but I don't think it's as direct as that. So when Arnold was courting Peggy, her father wanted to be sure he could support the family. So the father, her dad Edward, and his brother sort of loaned money to Arnold, and Arnold bought, if you ever go to Philadelphia to the Fairmount Park system, Mount Pleasant in Fairmount Park is still standing. It's a mansion that Arnold bought to show, and he put a document that said this mansion is for Peggy. So, but the family would typically want to be sure that the daughters were secured financially before a marriage would happen, right? So Peggy as a 17-year-old was definitely, well, you saw, right? But Peggy, as she matured, she lived a very parsimonious life. And she wrote her dad at one point when she was in London, and she's probably in her 20s, and she said, I was in a shop and I saw the Shippen cup. And this was for Shippen like 6 generations. And she said, so I went home to see if I had enough plate to sell so that I could get this cup for you because I knew you would really want it. And then when I went back, someone had already bought it. So she was not, over time, she really had to live a very frugal life. As a teenager, she probably just wanted to spend the money, right? So I don't think that was the motivation per se, but Arnold also, oh my goodness, he loved to live above his means, right? He was the guy in the coach and the four and the finery. Like he wanted to be the man. So he himself wanted to be out there invisible looking like they had it, yeah. So I appreciate so much your attention tonight. I'm happy to stay and answer a couple other questions, but thank you, Colin, for inviting Margaret Arnold here.
Thank you for being with us this evening. One big round of applause, everybody. This was phenomenal, really excellent. Don't forget to join us next month, April 8th, for an exciting presentation on the 1780 Battle of Paramus. I have been very busy with the spelling bee, which was last night, and hopefully by the end of the week I will have all the information together for you so you will understand what we will be doing next month. As always, you can go to the Bergen 250 website to see all of our film talks from this series. Tomorrow we will have Mr. Kevin Tremble's talk up for viewing. And thank you all so much. We're going to see you again next time.